We begin tonight with retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. Colonel, great to see you. What do you make of the status of Ukraine right now? Because, again, as the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal writes today, Ukrainian forces fought Russian invaders to a stalemate.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt in anybody's mind, least of all Vladimir Putin's, that the Ukrainian armed forces fought not just bravely, but much smarter and much more capable than anybody thought that they were capable of fighting, and to include me. I didn't think that they would have the capacity to resist to the level that they have up to this point. That being said, however, that the overall forced balance of power between the two still lies in the side with Russia. And so the Ukraine's definitely not out of the woods yet. And what appears to be a stalemate right now, in many cases, appears, from my assessment, to be the Russians are preparing for new offensives. And in some places in the south and in the east, they've actually been making some pretty methodical territorial progress, which could put the rest of the Ukraine's, a large portion of them, in danger in there. So they're definitely not out of the woods yet, and that's why I'm a real proponent of these peace talks, and I hope they result in some positive outcomes soon so that we can stop the killing. That's the number one thing we got to get done.
But what about the idea that the US and NATO will press Ukraine to settle?
Well, I don't know that it's pressed to settle so much as it might be, hey, we got to look at the reality of the balance of combat power here. And I just don't see a path that Ukraine can continue to resist or can, quote, win. I think the longer it goes, the more the destruction of the Ukraine cities and the more people will be killed. But I think ultimately Russia will continue moving forward. So I think it's actually in Ukraine's interest to get the best deal they can get right now to stop the killing so that they can make a better deal over time, because we're going to still have a lot of leverage over Russia in the time ahead of time. But if we wait until they advance more militarily, then there's going to be a lot more people killed than there otherwise would be.
What about arms flowing into the country, into Ukraine, Colonel? The U.S., and this is also from the Journal, the U.S. is sending some of the Soviet-made air defense equipment that we acquired decades ago to bolster the Ukrainian military. And the hope is, if we still, NATO and the West still stand against a no-fly zone, but this would help at least Ukraine to create a de facto no-fly zone with these additional air defenses.
Well, it certainly would help. I mean, to have any additional S-300 systems or SA-14, SA-12s, a number of other anti-air missile systems that are being talked about right now, that would certainly help. But a dose of reality is, again, unfortunately required here, because the S-300s are exactly what Ukraine had at the start of the war, probably more than half of which have already been knocked out, because they're of an older generation that Russia already knows how to. Obviously, they made them. They know how to get rid of those things. So they may not provide the real game changer status that I think a lot of people want. And we just need to understand that it's going to help, but it's not probably going to turn the tide, I'm afraid.
Even if we escalate weapon shipments?
See, most of the weapons we're talking about with these anti-armor, anti-air missiles, etc., those are defensive type weapons. They can slow down a Russian assault, but they're not offensive weapons. So already Ukraine has lost a great many armored vehicles and tanks, which they can't be replaced. Those you can't get in there. And to conduct a counteroffensive to push Russia back, you would have to have mobile armor. And so far, none of the weapons we're sending in will do that. It will exact a much higher price on Russia as they continue to advance, but the best it can do is slow them down.
People talk, before we go, Colonel, people talk about, they use the word crazy and unhinged to refer to Vladimir Putin. But if you're going to enter a nuclear standoff with the West, which is what Putin is doing, is kind of raising the threat of nuclear weapons and then flooding Western countries with now it's 3 million refugees so far, approaching 3.5 million refugees. That's the whole point, is when your strategy is a nuclear standoff to the other side, to the West, to the US and NATO, you have to appear unhinged to the point that you might actually use those nuclear weapons. Putin wouldn't act rationally, because then the U.S. and the West and NATO would know that he might that he's bluffing, or that he might not use nuclear weapons. So this is by design.
Here's a scarier scenario. He's not unhinged, and he still might use them. A lot of people aren't aware that in the year 2000, Vladimir Putin authored the concept of what's called deterrence, self-deterrence, which he uses in the strategic sense of being the use of tactical nuclear weapons, de-escalation, I'm sorry. If the other side, if NATO is moving towards him and he feels threatened, he can de-escalate by using tactical nuclear weapons. And that's his actual rational position, not an irrational one, which means the stakes could be even higher, which was the reason why I say it is incumbent upon NATO. We have to be firm that our first allegiance is to the people of our alliance and the United States. We cannot risk this escalating beyond to where we find out if he's going to do it, because it would be catastrophic, and we just can't go backwards from that.
I hear so many people talking about the war on Ukraine, and did they miss Grozny? Did they miss Aleppo? Did they miss the strategy of Vladimir Putin for the last 20-some-odd years? Because certainly financially, he's been planning something like this for more than a decade.
Without question. I actually published something the other day that showed it's actually about a 15-year preparation period of time, and you're absolutely right. I mean, this is basically from their playbook that they've done before, and this is what full-scale war looks like, which is one of the reasons why I'm such an outspoken effort to let's don't get into a war if it can all be possible to avert one. Let's certainly don't choose into one, but now then one is upon us, and this is what it looks like. And Vladimir Putin is following the things that he's done before. You're absolutely right on that. And another reason why I think it's in Ukraine's interest for us to do all we can to help diplomatically bring this to an end, because I assure you, this can get a lot worse.
What does Greg Gutfeld say? Rigorous, audacious diplomacy. We'll see if that works. Lieutenant Colonel Davis, great to see you. Thank you so much, Colonel.